Hey guys, this is Greaseball. Today I'll be doing a full deck tech of Jetstorm and also provide a guide of tips and tricks to improve your gameplay with Jetstorm. So firstly, this is a Necropotence deck. It's the most powerful card in the format, in my opinion. So to maximize Necro, you need two things. One, fast mana to get early Necros down, and two, a way to quickly win the game so that your low life total is not a liability. With that in mind, let's get to the fast mana of the deck. Most Necro decks in the format only get to run Dark Ritual as their fast mana, whereas we get to run 12 other pieces of fast mana in these 8 Treasure Dorks and Phyrexian Tower. And we get to run these Treasure Dorks because they're a part of our combo, and these Treasure Dorks also just naturally synergize really well with Phyrexian Tower. So we end up being like by far the most consistent early Necro deck in the format with our fast mana package. Now moving on to the combo. The combo is to first have a Jet Medallion and a Treasure Dork in the graveyard somewhere. And then you can play an Apprentice and another Treasure Dork into play. Then, because you have Jet Medallion down, Nightmare is only going to cost 1 mana. And so you play it for 1 mana, and then you can sacrifice your Dork in play and target the Dork in the bin. And when the Dork in play dies, it'll create a treasure, right? And so that treasure will naturally create a mana to cast your 1 mana Nightmare. And so you're going to be able to loop these two Dorks infinitely. And while you're looping them infinitely, your Marionette Apprentice is going to trigger and make your opponent lose all their life. And so this like 5-card combo ends up justifying the fact that you can play like all this early mana, which is really, really nice. And then it provides you a win con for your late game when you have drawn a lot of cards off a Necro. So now moving on to the fair game plan. Even if you're missing a piece to the infinite combo, you have access to a ton of soft combos with your Nightmare loops. And I'll go into this more in the intermediate section in the tips and tricks. But outside of all our dorks, all of our treasure dorks, all of our creatures are 2-for-1s. And in combo matchups, Grief gives you a free way to interact with your opponent's hand. And then you also have this like threat of looping Griefs and keeping them out of the game. So you might disrupt your opponent initially and slow down their combo by like a turn. And this turn is actually going to give you enough time to activate Nightmare once, build up the energy, and then activate it again to get a Grief into play. And then you can just loop them. You can Nightmare loop them with Grief every turn. And you basically just lock them out of the game with these Grief like Nightmare loops. And you can also just evoke Grief and sacrifice it to tower to create mana and like get turn 2 Necros that way. It also lets you keep like your really strong 1-land tower hands where you have like Ritual Necro, but tower is your only land. But if you have a Grief, you can actually just keep the land, evoke Grief, sacrifice it to tower or Dark Ritual, and get your Necro down. And it's like completely fine because, yeah, you spend like three cards to like get this Necro down, but Necro is going to draw you 10 cards that turn anyways or whatever. So like it really doesn't matter, and it lets you keep your stronger 1-land hands with tower. And tower is a really good resource that you want to have access to. So it helps increase consistency in the deck that way as well, which is really nice. This deck is also just really good at hard casting Grief. You can curve Medallion into Grief, which is really nice. And you also just have access to this entire fast mana package, which lets you like curve out like and resolve a Grief like on turn 2 if you really want to, with just like a tower, dork, and a swamp, which is really nice. We're also on 4 Bowmasters. This gives you recursive removal versus energy, which is really nice. It's also great versus Brainstorm decks. You also just get to cast it for 1 mana when Medallion's out, and it creates an extra body for Nightmare. It does everything this deck wants, so we're playing 4 of them. Now I will note that this isn't the strongest fair game plan in the format, right? But it kind of gets supplemented by this looming threat of Necro. So Necro either allows us to get a ton of cards, and so our fair game plan is like really juiced by like having access to a ton of efficient spells that we can play every turn. Or post board, what happens a lot is because Necro is so threatening, there's a lot of board states where if Necro comes down, Necro's just going to win the game immediately, right? You're like at parity, and then you have 20 life or 15 life or whatever, and they have like 1 creature in play. You put a Necro down, draw 7 cards, the game's like pretty over, right? So it's very scary on the opponent's side to play against a Necro, and so they have to kind of proactively play out hate against it without full information of your hand all the time. And so what happens is like opponents sometimes end up having to keep like these if your hands that have a Pithing Needle or something like that, and turn 1 they have to play the Pithing Needle because their price, if Necro comes down, the game's kind of over, or and they have to name the necropotence because that's the card that blows the game out and draws 15 cards, right? So they have to invest like a full card in Pithing Needle and a mana into playing Pithing Needle, and you might not even have the necro in your hand, or you just have a tutor in hand and you no longer have to get a necro, right? And so you basically just want a free tempo and a card off the threat of the necro taking over the game without having to do anything on your own. And so that's like where this fair game plan can become relevant. Is you're virtually, you have a lot of instances post board where you're virtually up a card and a mana and tempo without having done anything. And so your fair game plan becomes a lot more reasonable, and your Nightmare Loops have a lot more runway to take over the game because the threat of necro has basically like bought you a card for free. Another thing that's like nice about this combo is that because your combo naturally wants you to have creatures in play, you're very happy to play out your creatures to the board, as it'll save you mana on future combo turns. So like if you play out a Dork or like a Marionette Apprentice, it's saving you a mana, right? Because you've already gotten them into play instead of having to play them on your combo turn. So you're very incentivized to build out your board, which is nice. And you don't have to like deeply consider, oh, is this creature going to live next turn or not? Because it doesn't really matter. If they get killed, you either get the mana back and a treasure, or you still have like a servo from Apprentice that's like usable as like nightmare fodder, right? So you really just are free to play out creatures as much as you want, and it's generally just a really good play to do that. So that's really nice that you don't have to hold back creatures and really calculate whether or not they're going to get removed or not. And this is something a bit more subtle, but you'll notice it especially against combo decks. The benefit of playing like creature combo is that as things slow down post board, your combo opponent will not have any board presence because show and tell, shift and tell, they don't play any creatures. Goblin Charbelcher does not play any creatures, and so they're not going to have any board presence. And so you just get to consistently attack them down with like your 1/1s, your Griefs, your Marionette Apprentices, and like they don't get to block ever, right? And so if neither of you combo that game, you're going to win the game. And then so they have to combo you out to win. Whereas you can just kind of interact with them and beat them down, or you can just combo them out too. You also have that game plan. So there's just a lot more pressure on them to get quick combos and like win through disruption, whereas you kind of get to do both, which is really nice. As for the life gain package, we're running 2 March and 1 Meat Hook Massacre. You're going to see March in pretty much every Necro deck in the format. It's a pretty great card that leverages extra cards off of Necro well, and it essentially gives you a lot of selection of redraws off the huge life gain that it allows. Meat Hook also helps us stabilize versus aggro decks like Energy. We're really good at getting Meat Hooks for X equals 2 or 3 because we play so much fast mana in Medallion, right? We just have access to a lot of early mana to create bigger Meat Hooks that other decks are not going to have access to. So we also get to like immediately use the life gain from Meat Hook for Necro cards. And Meat Hook also acts as an apprentice effect because it causes an opponent to lose a life whenever our creatures die. So we can actually just combo off with like a Meat Hook and 2 Dorks, a Medallion, and a Nightmare too, which is really nice. And so it's a really good tutor target versus aggro game 1. And so you can also just randomly use it as burn if you top deck it against like a combo deck and you have a few apprentices in play because the effects stack. And so it's really, really, really nice to have access to it game 1 in the main deck. And this was Tommy's idea to include it in the main deck. So I'll give him credit for that. He won't stop yapping about it. So kudos to Tommy. Moving on, we're also playing 5 tutors. Early game, these can help us get a necro down by getting either like a ritual or a necro to like accelerate us out or find the necro. And then we can also use it to like, if we have our necro set up, we can tutor for a grief and use that to like hand check for counter spells or something like that. And protect our necro play, right? Mid game, these can find cards like March or Meat Hook Massacre to kind of, or sideboard cards and help us like interact with our opponent and bridge us to the late game. And then late game, these help us find like our last missing combo piece or provide resiliency against discard. And they also just like construction of like the deck wise allow you to run less sideboard cards and like lower counts, and it's really nice. So you don't have to run like 4 ofs or you can stick to like 2 ofs and you're just going to have access to them through virtue of like seeing a bunch of cards off Necro and having 5 tutors. Regarding the mana base, so because we are a ritual Necro deck, we want all of our non-tower mana to come in untapped on 1 and be able to tap for black. So to maximize our chances of Dark Ritual Necro on turn 1. And so because we're a Necro deck, we also don't want to be losing life, right? Because if you fetch Sock, that's basically 3 cards that you're not getting access to off a Necro because you took 3 life, right? So we're not going to be playing any fetches, and we're not going to be playing any shock lands. Notably, we only have 4 green sources, but we only play green post-board, and we are really good at generating treasures with dorks, so it's not too big of an issue. You could go up, you could swap out like 1 or 2 swamps and play some green-black pathways if you really want. It kind of depends on the metagame and how popular Blood Moon is versus how popular permanent base Graveyard Hate is and how often you need to fight through it. Regarding like final thoughts on this 60, I do think that the main deck is pretty tight at the moment, and it's probably not going to change too much unless like really strong new cards are released. Because you're a 5-card combo, you really need 4 of each combo card to maximize your combo chances. You just really need high like card density for it to work. And the flex cards are like Bowmasters and Grief, which are like 2 of the strongest like black creatures in the entire format. So and they also just happen to like align with like generating next body for Nightmare, or like, you know, going well with Phyrexian Tower. So it's going to be very difficult to replace these cards just because they're so powerful and they synergize so well with what the deck is doing. Now, moving on to the sideboard, I will say that I maintain a sideboard guide on my Mox field, and that's going to be like kept up to date with whatever the meta is doing at the time. Now, something to keep in mind is we're a combo deck in the format, and the only combo deck we're slower than is Show and Tell by like a turn. And so that's one thing, is we're just faster than most of the format. And 2, because we're on Necro and because we're on 5 tutors, we're actually going to have access to like a lot of our cards, and we don't need to run, we can have a much leaner sideboard because we see so many cards, right? The only exception to this is the Fence Grid, where you really need to play it on turn 2. It's much worse if you have to tutor for it and play it out. You just really need to draw these and like have immediate access to them so that you can resolve the rest of your spells. So now going through the sideboard, you have Duress and Grief, which makes up part of our like discard package. And they also like synergize really well with Surgical, because you can have things like if you have a Surgical in hand and a Dork and a DI, you can like DI for the DI with the Dork, right? DI for Duress. You have a treasure, you cast Duress off the treasure, and then you can like Surgical immediately, whatever you discarded off your opponent. And so that's like a really nice like anti-combo strategy that you just have access to. And it's the consistency is increased the time just by having access to your tutors. And then now we have our anti-hate package, which are the Haywire Mites and Boseiju. These cards are really nice. Boseiju is uncounterable. It's also really good against shifting woodlands. Haywire Mite like gains you life, which is very, very meaningful when you're a Necro deck. Sometimes you just end up looping like a Mite with like a Dork and Nightmare, and you just gain 6 life because you looped it 3 times, and you can draw 6 cards off Necro. So I've won several games off just like we're at parity. Oh, I hit my Mite off a Necro, and then I just loop my Mite a bunch, and my opponent can't do anything about it, and the game's just over. So having access to Mite is like super, super great. It's probably my favorite sideboard card to play, honestly. But yeah, really great. And let's see, moving on, we have the Vexen Bobble for Show and Tell and Scam decks. Scam is still really difficult on the draw. Sometimes you just have to top deck against Scam, but Vexen Bobbles are really nice to have access to. The Fence Grids are basically for all your like mana drain decks, just so you can like get it out early and blank a lot of cards in their hand. Super great card. And we have a lot of fast mana too, so we're really good at playing like these early grids ahead of like their opponent's counter spells. Mindbreak Trap is specifically for Show and Tell. It's our worst like tier 1 deck matchup, and it's still like super playable. And this basically like allows us to draw a bunch of cards off Necro, keep our combo in hand, and then have like a Bobble and a Mindbreak Trap available. And we kind of like have this idea of hand protection. But yeah, basically like there's been a lot of discussion that has gone into this card on Discord, and it'll probably get its own video at a certain point because there's a lot of thought that has been put into it, and I think it is a really good card that specifically this deck gets to play against Show and Tell. Lastly, we have our Meat Hook Massacre, our second one for aggro decks. Again, this is a really great card, and against any kind of creature decks, we're really excited to bring it in. And yeah, super sweet. Now, so that's kind of the 75. I will be going through tips and tricks after this. There's going to be 3 tiers. There'll be beginner, intermediate, and advanced sections. I suggest at least skimming through them all just to see a good like breadth of the lines in the deck. and to kind of consider the possibilities in gameplay that this deck offers. I'm not really intending for you to like absorb everything in one sitting. This is very much intended to be a resource that you can refer back to and build on. So with that in mind, we can we can get to the tutorials. Before I go into tips and tricks, I'd like to go through some common mistakes with the deck. Number one is forgetting to count treasure as a mana, and forgetting that your nightmare loops with dorks are actually going to be 1 mana less, because you're going to generate a treasure. Number two, forgetting to attack your creature combo deck. Do the creature part. Number three, removing your last nightmare target from your graveyard when you're looping nightmare. And number four is missing turn 2 necro combos. When you have a dork and DI and either half of ritual necro, you can just tutor for the other half and you'll have a turn 2 necro. To do the combo, you need access to 5 mana and all 5 of your combo pieces. One of your dorks can be in the graveyard. Make sure to play Jet Medallion first, so that your other 2 drops only cost 1 mana. Then, when you get an Apprentice and your Treasure Dork in play, you can start looping your Treasure Dork with Nightmare. Whenever you evoke Grief, you can hold full control in order to sack it to tower. Whenever you're activating Necro, you can hold full control to activate it more quickly. This will save you a lot of time. Whenever you're getting your cards off of Necro at end of turn, if you hold up a card in hand, the cards will move more quickly. This will also save you a lot of time. If you put a stop at the end of your turn, you'll be able to cast March and exile cards from your hand before you discard the hand size. This will make your marches much bigger and allow you to save a ton of resources. Whenever you can, try to select a different dork than the one you already have access to. This will make surgical extraction worse against your deck should they try and interact with your combo. So, counting. If you've played this deck a fair amount, you've probably spent a large chunk of time in your games figuring out whether you can combo or not. And then sometimes, you think you have the combo, you go for the combo, and you end up being a mana short. To help with this, Adam and I have developed a system called counting to figure out if you're likely to have enough mana to go off, 1, before you do a big necro, and 2, after you have seen all the cards off of a necro. So the benefits and purposes of counting are, 1, you reduce the mental load of playing the deck because you're no longer worried about comboing as much. You can focus on the other fair interactive parts of the game. Number 2, you can develop a better understanding of how to build out your board before a combo turn. You might learn that, playing out a Jet Medallion is actually better than playing out an Apprentice prior to my combo turn. 3, you'll develop an understanding of when you have enough mana to actually go for it on your combo turn. Number 4, you develop an intuition of when you might have enough extra mana to play around hate. This could be like leaving up towers to play around exile removal, keeping an extra tutor. There's even situations where like it's very committal. Like if you want to play around a Force of Vigor, you have to know that you can play out the bauble before your Medallion and your Nightmare, right? So you really have to be confident and really have to understand counting to have a good grasp of when you can play out a bauble or preemptively play around hate. Number 5, you can help understand when to go for it in your linear combo matchups with no reach, like show and tell, shift and tell, and charbelcher. At some point, you are just racing, and you do have to just kind of go all in on your combo. And so it kind of helps to understand when the best, like what your benchmarks are to go for that all in moment in these linear matchups. Now, getting into counting. For permanents in play, treasure, all dorks, and your first apprentice are all +1. Having a nightmare in play is also +1. Having Phyrexian in tower in play is +2, and all other lands are +1. If you have a jet medallion in play, it's +3. For in hand, if you have a medallion in hand, it's +1. If you have a dark ritual in hand, it's +2. Now for your benchmarks are, before you go for a big necro, you want to have at least 4. And on your actual combo turn, you want to have at least 6. Here we have a turn 1 necro, so we're going to do that. With our necro down, we'll have a count of 1 with a land in play and no extra count available. So if we make a land drop next turn, we'll have a count of 2, but 4 is our necro benchmark. So we actually need to see quite a few cards. I'm going to necro for 6, but you could arguably necro for like 8 or 9 here. We need to see either a ritual or a medallion or a tower plus a combo piece or 2 dorks, and those would all get us at least to our benchmark of 4. So we'll play a land for turn and figure out the count. With 2 lands in play, that's 2, and with a ritual in hand, that's 4. So we can play out the dork for us to put us at a count of 5, which exceeds our necro benchmark of 4. So with our count of 5, which is above our necro benchmark of 4, we can necro down to 4 life and try and go for a combo next turn. And again, this is because I know Sparky does not have any reach and is not going to interact with me meaningfully. If you're against like blue-black or something, you're not going to go for it in spots like this just because they're going to have counter spells and blank a lot of your stuff. And so you really need to like have seen their hand with grief or like have really a large excess count to play through their like counter spells and interaction. So we'll play out a land for turn. With our lands, we have a count of 4 because you get an extra count from tower. We have a dork in play, so 5, and we have a ritual in hand, so the count is 7. We also have a medallion in hand, so the total count is 8. So we have a count of 8, and 6 is our combo turn benchmark. We are missing an apprentice, so we will have to tutor for it, which will cost 1 in count. So I'm going to do the combo and DI for apprentice. Because our count is 8, and we have to tutor for a combo piece, we're not going to have enough excess count to hold up tower this turn. You need an excess count of 2 to hold up tower. So I'm going to do the combo and DI for apprentice and play out the full combo now. And so we started this turn with a count of 8, which is 2 more than 6, our combo turn benchmark. And we had the tutor for a combo piece, which cost us a count. So we have our full combo in play now, with 1 extra count available with the untapped land. This is not enough to hold up tower, but it would be enough to preemptively play out like a bauble to play around Force of Vigor. So because we had 2 extra count, we had enough resiliency built in to tutor for a missing combo piece and still have an extra count to leverage. So this is kind of a good example of your count is a bit over the combo turn benchmark, and so you get resiliency that way, but it's not enough to do something like hold up tower. We have a turn 2 necro, so we're keeping. The count is 2 with a land and a dork in play, but count isn't really important until we get a necro down. We can start with a grief, because we're going to necro this turn anyways. And now we can do our DI combo for turn 2 necro. And so here our count is 2, right? Because we have 2 lands in play and no additional count. Since we want to try and plan to hit our necro benchmark of 4 next turn, we need a necro something to help us set up at a count of 4 next turn. Because right now with the additional land in hand, we're only going to hit a count of 3. Because we need an additional card to hit count, I'm going to necro for 7. And to get our benchmark of 4, we can hit like any combo pieces, tower, or ritual to do this. So we're very likely to be able to hit our benchmark of 4 next turn. So we play a land out for turn. Let's do the count. With 3 lands in play, that's 3. Then we have 2 rituals in hand, which is 4. So our total count is 7. We can play out a dork, putting us at a count of 8. Then we can play out apprentice, which puts us at a count of 9. We don't have the combo available, but we are very, very likely to go off with a big necro, since our necro benchmark is 4, and we have a count of 9 right now. So because our count is so large, we are probably going to have the option to have backup tutors for interaction. And if we necro into a tower, we can hold it up next turn to play around exile removal. So we're going to go to 1 off of necro since Sparky does not have reach or interaction. So now let's do the count for our combo turn. We have 3 lands in play, so 3. A dork in play, so 4. An apprentice in play, so 5. 2 rituals in hand, so 9. And now we have a medallion in hand, so we have a count of 10 for our combo turn. We only need 6 count for our combo turn, and we drew all of our combo off of necro. So we'll have an excess count of 4 available for our combo turn, and we'll be able to like play around things if we want. So I'll go ahead and play out the combo. Again, we started this combo with a count of 10. And we had a count of 10, and our needed count for our combo turn is 6. So you're going to see we have the full combo in play, and we have 4 mana available with 2 mana floating and 2 untapped lands. This 4 mana left over represents the difference between our count 10 versus 6, which is our combo turn benchmark. And so with a draw like this, you could actually like play out a bobble ahead of time to play around Force of Vigor. You could hold up tower to play around exile removal. You could actually evoke grief and loop it twice before you started playing out the rest of your combo. And so like these higher counts are going to allow you to play through more interaction. And they're also going to give you resiliencies where if you don't draw your full combo, if you draw tutors or stuff like that, you can still tutor for your combo and you'll still have enough extra mana to play around with. So these higher counts are going to make you more likely to go off and allow you to play through more interaction, which is really nice. So we have a turn 1 necro here. We're going to do that. We have 1 land in play and a medallion in hand. So the current count is 2. That is below our desired benchmark of 4 that you would want for a big necro draw. So we're not going to go for a big necro draw because our count's only 2. Now we need to think of how to get to a count of 4 the next turn to set up a big necro draw. Next turn, with our current hand, we could make our land drop and play out Medallion, which would give us a count of 5. 2 from our 2 lands in play, and 3 from a Medallion in play. A count of 5 surpasses our benchmark of 4, so we can just draw 5 to 6 cards off of Necro, because we already have a plan to set up our count for a big Necro next turn. So we're going to draw 6 cards here off of Necro. And our current plan is to make a land drop and play out Medallion. But we might see different cards off of the Necro that might change this. Okay, so we'll start by playing a land. Playing a land per turn is going to add 1 to our count, so we're now at a count of 3. And casting the Medallion will give us a count of 5, which is good, right? But now looking at the cards that we drew from Necro, I see that we have a different play that could be better. Playing out 2 dorks would give us a count of 5 as well, with 2 lands, 2 dorks in play, and a Medallion in hand. So it would be the same count. Dorks are more resilient to removal because if they die, they'll make the treasure, and the count will remain the same. Whereas if the Medallion gets removed, you just lose 2 count. So 1, the dorks are more resilient, and 2, by playing out 2 cards instead of the 1 Medallion, I'm able to free up a hand slot so that I have more selection off of my big Necro. So we're going to go with playing out 2 dorks. And so we have a count of 5 now with the 2 dorks, the 2 lands, and a Medallion in hand. This meets our benchmark, and we have the option to go for a big Necro. Since Sparky is probably not going to interact with us, I'm going to go down to the lowest life total I think is safe versus their reach. In this case, it's 1. But if they, they were on like mono red or, Boris energy or something like that, you might go down to 4. Now for our combo turn, we'll make a land drop. And now let's figure out the count. We have 3 lands in play, just so 3, plus 2 dorks, so 5, plus Medallion in hand, which is 6, plus a ritual in hand, which is 8. So we have a benchmark of 6 to go off with our combo. So we do have enough mana to go off this turn, and we should have 2 spare mana to work with. And you should technically lead on grief here, but it's not super important to this. And so we are kind of missing 2 things for this combo off of our Necro draw. One is we're missing a sacrifice effect to get a dork into the graveyard, and 2, we're missing an apprentice. So we're actually going to have to demonic tutor for a DI so that we have a way to put a dork in the graveyard, and then we're going to have to DI for an apprentice. So even though we did not get the apprentice drawn off of Necro, because we had a count of 8 for our combo turn, which is 2 more than our combo benchmark of 6, we have enough excess mana to tutor twice and still go off. And so higher counts will give you a higher chance to combo off through different Necro draws. So here you can see that we have the combo, despite having to basically tutor twice, which is -1 mana per tutor. because we had a count of 8. So because we had a count of 8, we were able to tutor twice and still go off because our benchmark is 6, right? So 8 minus 6 is 2, so we get to tutor twice and still go off. Counting misconceptions. Just because you have the mana doesn't mean you have to go for the big necro to combo. Number 2, you're not guaranteed to draw the combo off of the necro cards. You could have 4 mana, which meets the benchmark to go off with necro, and you might just draw 10 lands off a necro. That can happen. Counting is not to tell you whether or not you're going to go off next turn. It's, are you reasonably likely to draw into the mana to go off with the big necro? Counting frequently asked questions. Why are Apprentice and Nightmare +1? Aren't they 2 mana spells? Because they will be reduced to 1 on your combo turn with Medallion. Why is Medallion +1 in hand and +3 in play? Whenever you tutor for something, if you have access to Medallion, it will be 1 mana. If you ever tutor for Medallion, you don't have one, so the tutor will cost 2 mana. So by having a Medallion in hand, you won't have to pay 2 mana to tutor for Medallion, and are essentially saving a mana. You add 2 for casting Medallion, because it always costs 2 mana to play out. If I have a turn 1 Necro and a tower in hand, can I count the tower as +1? You can. Most Necro setups will not have a tower in hand, and I did not want to create the misconception that you can count multiple towers. Towers and multiples aren't really good in turns 2 to 5 and going off because they end up competing with DI too much for sack fodder. Why is there a 2 mana difference between the Necroing turn and the combo turn? Off of a big Necro, you can reliably draw a land and one of Tower, Medallion, or Ritual. Also, with a Medallion in play, tutors can also be mana positive by tutoring for Dark Ritual. If you have a Dork plus DI and either half of Dark Ritual Necro, you can tutor for the other half of Ritual Necro off of DI and get a turn 2 Necro down. After the combo itself, this is the most important combination in the deck, as it gives you a ton of consistency in getting early Necros down. This combination is so important that I'm going to show both halves of it. If you have a Dork plus DI and either half of Dark Ritual Necro, you can just tutor for the other one and get a turn 2 Necro down. On the draw, this actually makes your DI plus Dork hands pretty keepable, because you're actually getting 2 draws to all your Necros and all your Rituals for a turn 2 Necro. On the draw, you actually end up being at around a 30% chance for a turn 2 Necro if your opening hand has a Dork and a DI. Whenever you DI and sacrifice a freebooter, if you have a Necro in play, you can hold full control to activate Necro before you shuffle your deck with DI. This will give you the top card off your Scry before you end up shuffling your deck and losing that card. When you have a higher count, as shown here, you can start holding up Phyrexian Tower to play around exile-based removal. So because I had a Dark Ritual in hand, I'm able to not tap out my tower, and I can use the tower as a resource during my combo to play through interaction. So in this case, I know my opponent can have another Solitude in hand potentially, and so I'm going to leave up tower so that in case they try and disrupt my combo with Solitude, I can just Phyrexian Tower in response and rebuild out my board for my combo. So here, if my opponent plays out their Solitude, I'm just going to be able to activate tower in response to whatever they're targeting. In this case, it's Apprentice. And because you get 2 mana off a tower, you can basically rebuild whatever they're going to end up trying to target. And yeah, I guess, so some people want to bring in Bauble against Solitude decks, but I think actually, like, Tower is just so generically good against Solitude anyways that you might not even have to bring it in. Now, if you want to bring it in against Grief, I think that's a different story. But as you can see here, you can actually play around exile-based removal pretty well with the tower. Even when you're missing a piece of your combo, you still have access to very powerful nightmare loops. For instance, if you're missing only the medallion, you can loop the dorks and deal 2 damage per mana spent, as each dork cycles with nightmare for 1 mana, and apprentice also triggers off each of their treasures. You don't always need the full infinite combo to win, and sometimes these smaller nightmare loops are enough value and damage to close out a game. So, in this example, we end up dealing 9 damage in 1 turn with no medallion and only 1 apprentice in play. Say you're missing the second dork to your full combo, you can still get a lot of value and damage out of looping apprentice and a treasure dork. There are 2 things to keep in mind while doing this. 1, maintain a creature card in the graveyard to target with nightmare. 2, make sure to sacrifice the treasures while apprentice is in play. Now, in an actual game, I would cast a Dark Ritual and the second apprentice in hand, and the opponent would be dead from the burn damage. But I just want to showcase how powerful the apprentice and treasure dork loop is on its own. And here, I'm going to make sure that when I activate Tower, apprentice is in play. And then I'm going to go ahead and crack all of my treasures so that my apprentice sees all of their sacrifice effects. And as you can see here, we're going to end up with a lot of burn damage, a lot of servos, and a lot of scry value from the freebooter, which is really sweet. And there are several of these soft combos baked into the deck. You could be doing this loop with a Bowmasters or a Grief as well, and they're all very powerful. If you have access to Medallion, Nightmare, and 2 treasure dorks, and one of the treasure dorks is a freebooter, you have infinite scries. Using the infinite scries, if you have a necropotence in play, you can actually select cards off of each scry and essentially decide which cards you're going to draw off necro. I will say that if you have 2 freebooters, I believe you can do this as much as you want with Arena. If you have 1 freebooter and a ghast, you actually will lose arena time on the ghast activations. So I think you only have about like 5 minutes of game time if you're doing it with a freebooter and a ghast. So just be careful about that. But again, I think from what I've heard, if you have 2 freebooters, you can do this as much as you want. if you have a necro in play and access to a tutor, you can exile cards with necro before you tutor, and then when you use the tutor, you can see what you are going to draw off the necro and then tutor for your missing combo piece. The only time I wouldn't want to do this is if you need a sorcery speed card in your hand that turn, like a meat hook or a might. You want to tutor before you exile to necro, so that you don't accidentally exile your card that you want to necro. And sometimes you might even, like versus show and tell, you might see that you're going to draw your whole combo, and then you can just tutor for like a grief and interact with them before you go off the next turn. And so here you can see that we're missing 3 nightmares. We already have a medallion and a apprentice in play, so we don't have to worry about those. And then we're missing a freebooter, but we're not missing any ghast. So we only have 1 dork for our combo. So I'm going to take the ghast. And then you're going to see that we're actually going to draw into our combo, and the ghast will be the missing piece that we found off of our tutor. And you can also do this if you're going to like tutor for a march. You can see that, oh, I'm already going to draw a march in the turn, so I don't have to tutor for the march, and you can tutor for a different card. As you can see here, we have the full combo now in hand. Closing thoughts. So I basically made this guide to show some ideas in the deck, but I would say the biggest 2 takeaways you can take if you're going to learn something from this guide are the turn 2 DI into necro lines. They're not very intuitive right from the get-go, but once you learn them, you realize how consistent they make your early necros. Number 2, learn counting. Creating counting made this deck less exhausting and more fun to play. I would be having fun on ladder, and then I would think I had the combo, have calculated it all out, and then like, oh, I'm a treasure short, and I just die, I'm necro locked, and it sucks, right? So you just spend so much time worrying about whether or not you can combo that like it just kind of gets exhausting, and then you're not thinking about the rest of the actual game that's going on because you're so wrapped up in like, oh, am I gonna have this 5-card combo? Am I gonna have enough mana for it? And so by kind of learning counting, you're able to abstract that away and just kind of have it in the back of your mind of, oh, I can probably combo now that I have this much count. And then you can kind of focus on the like more interactive and fair game plan of the deck, which is really rewarding. And it makes your tutors a lot better because you actually are focusing more on game state rather than like, oh, I have to get 5-card combo, I have to get 5-card combo. So learn counting, learn counting, learn counting. Next, this deck has a lot of possibilities. Feel free to experiment. I would say if you want to play with slots, I'd say the most obvious flex spots in the main are the 4 Bowmasters, the 2 Griefs, and the mana. Mainboard changes I've been trying are 1 Darkboard Pathway, which is the green-black pathway over Swamp. And in the sideboard, I've also been trying Culling Ritual over the 2nd Surgical because Shift Until Metashare has gone down quite a bit. Then I've also been trying Reclamation Sage over Mindbreak Trap. I know people don't like spinning the Mythic Wildcard for Mindbreak Trap, but also I think Reclamation Sage might just be better because post-board Show and Tell is going to bring out their Borns against you and kind of load up on like ley lines and keep all their Veils in. So the effect of Reclamation Sage actually gets a lot better post-board because you're kind of juking what they're expecting to bring in. And then, you know, if they do bring in their Borns still, it means they're not bringing in other sideboard cards, or they're having to like keep a bunch of Borns in just to try and fight with your 1 Reclamation Sage, right? So I think the first Reclamation Sage effect is like pretty good. Lastly, I'm really excited that the deck that Adam and I built together is like doing well and people are interested in playing the deck. I think it's a really fun, interesting deck to play. And so, yeah, I'm really happy to keep making content for it. I'm probably going to do something for the metagame challenge, whether it be like just like a raw upload of all the games and then maybe like a commentary after. But I'm really excited for it. And I just want to say like, yeah, have fun with the deck. It's a really fun deck and I'm really excited about it.